WisconsinEye's Campaign 2024 programming is sponsored by Wisconsin Counties Association, Nicolet National Bank, Wisconsin Hospital Association, Operating Engineers Local 139, the Wisconsin Realtors Association, the Wisconsin Laborers District Council, and North Central State's Regional Council of Carpenters. To support programs like this, please consider a tax-deductible donation at wisi.org/donate or by texting WISI to 44321.
Ben Steinhoff of Pewaukee is the Democratic candidate for the 5th Congressional District. The election is November 5th. Ben Steinhoff, welcome to WisconsinEye.
Thank you guys for having me.
Oh, thank you for participating in our candidate interviews. Why are you running for Congress? How would you describe your campaign's key message?
One of the main reasons we're running for Congress is we didn't really see great representation in the 5th Congressional District. Scott Fitzgerald is currently holding that seat, and we really haven't, we got to know him a lot over the years working in state politics, and he got up to the national stage and really hasn't done much better than he was doing here in state politics. And one of the big driving forces that got me into it was back in 2020. The federal government gave every state a bunch of pandemic relief funding, and our state legislature decided to withhold that from giving it to EMS professionals. So we were reusing masks, different things like that, and we just weren't getting the funding that we needed, and that's really kind of what got me looking into politics a lot more than I was, and saw 2 races that he ran, 2020 and then 2022, and I just didn't think that the right candidate was running up against him. The 5th CD is a blue-collar, hardworking district, so I think that any representative of the 5th CD should, reflect those values, and that's really all I've done for my entire career is blue-collar, hard work, 2 jobs, 12-hour shifts, different things like that. So I think that I can much better represent the 5th CD than Scott Fitzgerald currently is.
What do you see as the most pressing challenge before the country currently, and what specific action are you planning to take in Congress if you're elected?
I think the biggest issue right now is, we have 2 groups of people that really aren't talking to each other. We have people, going back to COVID again. I think a big part of that happened back in 2020 when everybody, kind of got siloed off in their left and right chambers. And no one's really, coming back. In my line of work, I never get to pick who I work with. I never get to pick who, my patients are. And as a politician, I, don't get to do that either. I don't get to pick my voters. So I think that that's one thing, being in my line of work, whether I pull up to a house with a Trump sign or a house with a Harris sign, I have to treat them the exact same and I have to get them to trust me. So I've been doing it for my entire career, and I don't think Washington is going to be any different, but we really need leaders and not politicians right now in Washington.
How do you see the state of the economy, and what legislation or policy would you propose to incentivize economic growth specifically in Wisconsin?
Well, I think one of the biggest issues right now is the middle class and, what's left of the middle class currently, because as you know, a lot of people are getting priced out of the middle class. Wages are, kind of being a little bit stagnant over the last several years. This isn't just the last 4 years. We're going back. Minimum wage has been the exact same since the entire time I've been in the workforce. So I think that that's one of the first things that we need to change is we do need to raise the minimum wage so we can help pull people up. But I do think child tax credit, we need to raise that. We need to put that up to, the $6,000 for newborns that Harris is suggesting, and $3,600 for, anybody under the age of 6. And that child tax credit is going to, directly help people in the middle class. So I do think that's one, big step that we can take forward, and we can do it right away.
Inflation rates have stabilized but are still above pre-pandemic rates. What, if any, is the role of Congress in keeping the cost of goods and services low?
The biggest cost that they can do is they can, really try and help corporate greed is, I think, one of the biggest issues that we're facing right now, and there's something that we have to do about it. My opponent, Scott Fitzgerald, if we're talking about gas prices, he voted against, the gas tax cap. Him and every single Republican voted against that, and that's something, that we hear a lot of people on the other side complaining about is, gas is too darn expensive right now. Well, it's finally under $3 a gallon. We're drilling more now than we have ever done in the history of the U.S., so I think that that's helping, again, middle-class working families seeing those gas prices go down. So I think that we can enact a lot more legislation to help those middle-class families to feel a little bit less of that squeeze.
You talked a little bit about this, but I'll just ask you again. It's become increasingly expensive to raise a family. What policies do you support that make raising a family more affordable? You talked about increasing the child tax credit. Are there any other policies you support in that area?
I think the cost of daycare is, really one of the big things working in healthcare. We hear it directly from the families that are there. They have to take time off of work just to, take their kids in to be seen by us, God forbid. Seeing me, in the OR, the emergency room, or in the back of an ambulance, that's kind of the worst problem. But just getting more legislation out there to really lower the cost of child care here in this country, because it is gone up and up and up every single year, and not really matching with inflation. I know a lot of people that have quit their jobs because it's cheaper for them to not have an income than it is for them to send their kid to daycare. That's heartbreaking. That's why a lot of people my age aren't choosing to have kids right now, is because we just can't afford it.
What about housing? Cost of housing, another issue for Wisconsinites. What federal policies or legislation would you support that might lower the cost of housing, either for renters or for home buyers?
Well, I think one of the biggest issues that we're facing right now is a lot of these investment firms that are buying up homes, flipping them, and then selling them for a lot more money than they bought it for. Currently BlackRock investment firm, which is my opponent's number one investor, or donor, I should say. That's his number one donor, and they are buying up a lot of the family housing, because there's no cap on these, large conglomerates that can buy as many houses as they want, and they can choose to rent them out or they can choose to sell them right away. So I don't think that there's any reason that a corporation needs to own, 2,000 homes in an area, because you can't live in all of them. And so I think that's the first thing that we need to tackle.
Regulation around that?
The regulation around that investment industry.
Social Security faces potential long-term financing shortfalls. Do you have any suggested reforms for Social Security to support future solvency?
Well, right now, one of the first things that we could do is, there's a cap on what you pay into Social Security, and that's once you make over $168,000, you don't have to pay into Social Security anymore. And I hear the argument all the time from people, like, oh, well, I'll be, putting in more money than anybody else. Hey, if I faced that problem and I was making, $4 million a year, I think I'm going to be okay, paying into Social Security, helping other people out that don't have a retirement plan or a 401k or a massive savings account. So I think that we should completely eliminate that cap, because if you're making money, you're making off the, most likely the labor of other people. So you can chip in a little bit extra, because again, I think you're going to be just fine if you're making over that much money every year.
Transitioning to health care, medical systems are facing numerous headwinds in the form of inflation, workforce development, and issues around Medicare and Medicaid reimbursement, resulting in fewer services and even the closure of a hospital system in western Wisconsin. What would you do to preserve access to care and prevent future closures of this type in our state?
How much time do you have?
This is your issue.
Working, this is my biggest issue. There's 1,000 different ways that we could go with this one, but I'm going to try and keep it short. Again, going back to some of these investment firms, what they do is they buy up these hospitals. They gut the staff. They gut everything in there. You're working on skeleton crews, and they end up just selling off these companies after making tons and tons of profit by cutting back on the health care that's needed by people. Safe staffing ratios in hospital are essentially disappeared at this point, and I just don't think that's fair to the doctors, nurses, and techs that work there. It's also not fair to the patients that are receiving subpar care. And it's not, falling onto the nurses or anything like that. It's falling onto the administration and whoever's running the hospital by not wanting to pay for the care that people, deserve to get. So I think that's one of the biggest issues that we have.
Is that a regulation issue? Is that a funding issue? What can the federal government do about that?
I think that would be a regulation issue. We can put forward legislation immediately to make it so there is safe staffing ratios that are across the board. Doesn't matter, like which state you're in. If you're an emergency room nurse, there's no reason you should be taking care of, 6 different critically ill patients. So that's one thing that we can start with right away. The other thing is to incentivize people to go into medicine. So that's one of the biggest things that I want to do. That's my biggest issue when I get to Congress, is I want to be able to basically take people to go into emergency medicine, get their EMT license, and if they want to continue serving their communities, as long as you're, running on a service or something like that, we can continue to help, pay for your schooling to go and get up to that nurse level, get up to that doctor level if you want, but, just kind of have a federal program that really, helps people go into the medical field, because it's not only daunting and, just very scary to be a part of medicine, because people's lives are quite literally in your hands, but it's also, you look at the medical debt. My best friend and his wife are both physicians, and the medical debt that they incurred, even though they both had scholarships to their schools, is, it's mind-boggling. And that, is, I think, one of the biggest obstacles for people is, do I believe that I can get out of, $400,000 in debt? So I think that's a big issue that we really need to tackle from all sides.
Let's talk about local government. Local communities in Wisconsin are faced with a growing number of issues. For example, issues related to water quality like PFAS, or perhaps a sudden influx of refugees like Wisconsin saw in 2021. How do you plan to collaborate with local governments to ensure they have the necessary resources to address those types of issues?
I think right now the state of Wisconsin does have the resources to deal with the PFAS that you brought up, but our state legislature is unwilling to put the money forward that we have in our slush fund, because they don't want the corporations that actually polluted those waters to be held accountable. So I think that's one thing, is that we should really be looking at the safety of our citizens versus the safety of the C-suite at these companies. So, just really getting that message out and letting people know that, government should be working for the people. They shouldn't be working for the corporations that are, ultimately donating to a lot of these politicians. That's why we really want to get as much money out of politics as we can, because, as we know, we can look at that partisanship curve, and since 2010 with Citizens United, we've seen, both sides just go so far away from each other, and nobody's willing to come back to the middle. Again, that's why I say that we need leaders and not politicians in Washington.
Are tax cuts or increases of any kind of focus of your campaign? And just for example, do you support extending and making permanent the tax cuts from the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017?
Tax cuts are always great if they can help the middle class out. And what we've seen is a slow, steady rise in that percentage of taxes for the middle class every single year. I think since 2020, it's been going up and up, with the health Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. And specifically in the area that I live, in the 5th CD, one of the things I've heard from a lot of the business owners, they would keep saying, the reason that I'm going to be voting for Donald Trump is because they took away the R&D tax credits. And I have to let them know that the reason they went away was because of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act written by Trump and the Republicans. So I tell them that, and they just go, no, it just went away in 2022. And I go, yep. You read the bill, that's when it went, that's when it went away, was in 2022. So that is a direct line straight to Donald Trump and the Republican Party from 2017.
Should tax cuts or should taxes be increased on certain individuals? Again, we go back to the Social Security question. I do think that taxes should be raised, because there's no reason that you and I should be paying more taxes than Elon Musk. I'd say the tax issues. Look, I'm going to be 100% honest with you. I'm not an accountant. Most of my friends are accountants, which is kind of funny. But I've always been in the medical field, so the taxes are one area that I'll be the first to tell you that it's not really my strongest point. And I know it's a lot of people's main issue is their income and things like that. But that's why you have to surround yourself with
with good people that are professionals in that area. And I tell people all the time on the campaign trail, I'll be the first to tell you that I'm, not an expert in an area, and that's why we all need to collaborate together to make a better system. Anybody that tells you that they know everything or that they're an expert at everything, they're lying to you,
What about abortion? Should there be federal abortion policy passed by Congress, or should that issue be left up solely to states to decide?
Well, we have left it up to states partially at this point, and we've seen what's happened. That story just came out yesterday from the woman down in Georgia who ended up dying because she couldn't get an abortion for an unviable fetus because the doctors were afraid of getting sued. And so I do think that there should be, a federal, we should have codified Roe v. Wade when we had the chance to do it, but we didn't. So now we have to act moving forward. And unfortunately, lots of people have lost their lives, their loved ones, their mothers, their daughters because of this. It's been a direct action. So, if we look at the overturning of Roe v. Wade, we can draw a direct line to, people dying because they don't have access to health care, that they vitally need. So I do think, no one's ever going to agree on, the whole abortion issue. But I think if we really look at, when somebody's life is at stake, you have a duty to provide health care, and seeing people in those states, working in the emergency room, back of an ambulance, med flight, I've seen people in these dire situations, and I couldn't even put myself in the situation to think about how I would feel saying, no, I'm so sorry, I can't do anything because, I'll lose my license and go to jail for the rest of my life. That's horrifying. Mm-hmm. So I do think that it should be, codified in the law.
What is your position on climate change, and what congressional actions do you support that balance environmental and economic concerns with economic growth and job creation?
Well, if you go to my website or anything like that, you see that green is one of our predominant colors. All of our yard signs, all of our shirts, everything, it's all green, for two reasons. Number one, it's not red or blue, so people actually have to look into the issues that I stand for instead of just going, oh, I'm not going to vote for that side. And the other reason is because we want to show people that, yes, we are, a green candidate. And, green energy has gotten a bad rap from a lot of people that have interest in making money from oil. And I think that that's pretty unfair because, how do you get solar panels? How do you get wind turbines? How do you get hydroelectric dams? People build them, there's so many jobs in there. And what we can do as a nation is we can invest money, just like the Infrastructure Act that we have. We can invest money into something that we vitally need. And because I hear people talk all the time about how, we need to plan for the future. We need to, have people having kids. And a huge reason, besides not being able to afford kids, another reason a lot of people aren't having kids is because they don't know what kind of world we're going to be in. They don't know if, their kids are going to be able to even be outside in 15, 20 years. We see the increase in hurricanes, drastic weather patterns and things like that are directly attributed to climate change. So we need aggressive policy, and I know that this is going to turn some people off from me, but I really don't care because I'm looking towards the future. We need to act on climate change. We needed to act on climate change back in the 60s and 70s, and we didn't because we had people that were too greedy, essentially because they saw the money coming in from oil companies. If these oil companies, were really smart, they would have spent money in investing into green energy so they could then control oil and green energy, but they didn't. So here we are. We need to act. It is the biggest issue anybody talks to me about under the age of, I'd say, 40 probably.
Moving on to national security, should the U.S. continue to provide military support to Ukraine, and for how long and what form?
I absolutely think we should. They're one of our allies, and one of the biggest reasons I think that we need to be doing that is so we don't send our troops into Ukraine. So if we can support them, either monetarily or just with some of the equipment that we have, I think that that's much better than sending our sons and daughters, overseas to another war. A lot of people think that we're just giving money to Ukraine, and it's not just giving them money. It's using our, older, almost outdated equipment that we send overseas, and then in turn, we get that money, that $60 billion went back to states. And so the state of Wisconsin, I think, got somewhere around like $6 or $8 billion, to help build military tanks and things like that. And so it is money that goes back and stimulates the economy, the local economies, and it also helps our allies overseas, so we don't have to send troops.
How should the U.S. be balancing support for Israel with concerns over civilian casualties in Gaza?
So this is obviously, very divisive topic. And as somebody that's worked in emergency medicine for my whole career, the biggest point that I can make is I'm so sick of seeing innocent people die. Having seen what gun violence does, working in Pewaukee, is having seen what gun violence does. I've seen people from home explosions. I've seen, just like horrible accidents. And I just couldn't even imagine being somewhere where you see that on a daily basis. So again, this goes to politicians not being leaders. We need to get both of these sides down at a table. We need to come up with a solution. I don't care how long it takes, but we need to do that because innocent people in Gaza are dying. There's still hostages, Israeli citizens, American citizens that are still being held hostage by a terrorist group. But that terrorist group doesn't, they're not the innocent civilians that are dying. So, however we need to come to that conclusion, we need to do it, and we need to do it now. And I think the U.S. has a role in being a leader in, at the table, leading those conversations.
Are you troubled by the record-breaking amounts of out-of-state money being solicited by Wisconsin campaign operatives to influence our local election outcomes? And, what are your thoughts on that?
One of the first things I brought up was Citizens United, and I really, really think that the Supreme Court got that one wrong. I know a lot of other people do, and that's, I think, one issue that both sides can agree on. Maybe not necessarily the politicians up at the top, but everybody that I talk to, whether they're, a super far-right Republican or a super far-left Democrat, they both think that money needs to get out of politics. That's the campaign that we've been running, is, not raising millions and millions of dollars. And I think that we need to show people that you can, defeat an incumbent, you can beat an entrenched politician, with hundreds of thousands of dollars, in his war chest. We can beat him as long as we spend our money wisely that we get, and we get a good, solid team on the ground. One of the biggest things that I ask for people, obviously money buys signs and, shirts and ads and things like that. But if we have, people that really truly believe in us and they volunteer their time because they don't have the money to volunteer or they don't have the money to give to our campaign, they can go and they can knock doors and they can do it every weekend and they can know that they're making a direct action and making a difference in this election. So that's one of the biggest things that we've, been telling people is if you really want to make some change, do it with your feet, do it with your fist.
A lot of money.
By knocking doors.
By knocking doors. A lot of money being spent in these campaigns is going to broadcast and stream negative attack ads, many of which walk a fine line in terms of accuracy versus exaggeration. And at a time when the nation is so divided, how would you respond to a Wisconsin voter who would ask you to stop using negative ads if you were?
Yeah, well, that'd be the first thing I would tell them is that we haven't ran any ads. We haven't ran any attack ads either. And that's one thing that we're all sick of it. We're all sick of these, Tammy Baldwin. Did you hear the voice come on and you just go, oh, God, here we go again. If you can't stand on your policy and what you believe in, then I don't know if you should be running for office. So we are going to be coming out with, some campaign ads and different things like that in the next couple days, actually. And it's all going to be on what we believe in, what we want to do, and how we can help the, actual constituents in the 5th CD. So, I've hated negative campaign ads since I was younger. I remember, back in Bush v. Gore, I remember seeing one and asking my dad, Dad, why are they, saying bad things about this or that candidate? And he goes, well, it's because they can't stand on their own policies. And, I've kind of taken that to heart for my whole life. Never thought I'd be in politics, but
here we are.
Here we are.
Transitioning to education, the number of Wisconsin school districts going to referendum asking local taxpayers for funding is increasing. Is there a need to increase the federal amount of spending on K-12 public education? Well,
I do think that we need to invest a lot more into education because, again, we hear people on both sides saying, we need to invest in the future. Well, where can that money directly impact the youngest of us? It's K through 12 schools. We've seen a lot of state legislatures withhold money for student lunches. I don't know if you've ever had to deal with, choosing to either pay rent or to buy food. I have right here in Madison when I was, going to college. And you can't learn very well if all you're thinking about is food. I can't think about, multiplication tables and things like that.
So federal funding for school lunches?
I do think that we do need to increase it. And, one of the issues that, that I'm running on is marijuana legalization federally. Because if you look at the states that have legalized marijuana, they have robust education systems. They've done so many infrastructure projects. The state of Colorado, I think every year they, in revenue that they have for marijuana taxes, they've given I think it's 112 to 120 million every single year, so they can rebuild schools, they can get better technology in schools, and really make it. Bring their schools into the 21st century. So that is one way that, yes, I do think federal funding should be going into K through 12 schools. And how can we do that? By legalizing marijuana and putting that towards the EMS, healthcare, and education problems that we have.
Do you support federal student loan forgiveness?
I do, because if we look at a lot of the politicians' median age in the House is somewhere around 60, 65, retirement age. A lot of those people, when they went to school, and I hear it all the time from, a lot of the constituents is, well, I worked a full-time job and I paid for school. I worked 60 hours a week and went to school, and I still graduated with debt. And I was from a technical college. Out-of-state tuition for some schools is, just astronomical. And that's not even taken into account what books cost. So these 18-year-old kids, want to better themselves because they've been told their entire lives, go to school, get an education, get a degree. It's the only way you're going to get ahead. Well, a lot of my friends have those degrees, and they're drowning in debt right now. And they're not even using their degree in the field, that they wanted to go towards. So I think that, anybody that's complaining about, student debt forgiveness, we can, just turn it around and say, okay, well, then let's fix this problem of, out of control education costs. So I really think that that's something that needs to be focused on, is the cost of higher education.
What would you focus on in an effort to fix what many feel is a broken immigration system?
Well, one of the first things that this current 118th Congress could have done was pass the bipartisan border bill that was written by Republicans and Democrats, but they decided they didn't want to because they didn't want to give Joe Biden a win in an election year. They came out and they said it. So I think that speaks volumes to what their actual agenda is.
Does that bill include things that you support, or are there other things that you would focus on in immigration reform?
I would support everything in that bill. More funding for ICE agents, more Border Patrol agents, just better infrastructure for our immigration system. All of those things were in that bill, and it was, roundly agreed upon that everybody thought it was a great idea, and then Donald Trump said, no, don't give him a win, and Congress listened to a private citizen that was running for office. That just shows that they don't really care about their constituents. They care about Donald Trump and their own party.
We're down to the final two questions. What's the biggest difference between you and your opponent?
The biggest difference is that I show up to my district. I listen to my constituents. He hasn't held a town hall since I think it was May, and before that he hadn't had one since February. It's an election year. People have a lot of questions. People have a lot of, things that they, want to be heard in Washington, and he's not here talking to any of us about it. One of the, I think, biggest things is we have a debate set up, for me and Scott Fitzgerald at Carroll University, set up by the Carroll Progressives and the Carroll Republicans. They, offered to host the debate at their Performing Arts Center, and we reached out to Scott Fitzgerald and his campaign and asked if he, would want to do a debate so people could hear, from both sides. And they told us basically that there's no point. It'll only be negative if they came and debate us. And just telling me that there's no point in debating me, and they're just going to, run off the hope that it's a very red district, because it has been a red district for a long time. But I know a lot of people are very, sick and tired of Scott Fitzgerald, because when I was going out collecting signatures to get on the ballot, I'm doing it in a very red area. So I'd give my spiel to everybody. Everybody's first question, are you Democrat or Republican? I'd say I'm running as a Democrat, and they'd go, no, thank you, close the door. And then they'd crack it back open, and they'd go, who are you running against? I'd say I'm running against Scott Fitzgerald. And they had some things to say, and, a lot of it was, like, oh, we need to get him out of office, he doesn't represent us, and, that got my foot in the door with these people. And they would just, what did you say you did again? I told them, I'm paramedic, I was a firefighter for a number of years, work at a children's hospital right now, and so, kind of, I don't want to say humanizes, but I don't know, a better way to put it. So
well, here's a question related to that. This is our last question. Given the steep national partisan divide, what's one issue that you think has potential to be resolved in a way that would bring parties together?
My top issue, 911. 911 reform is something that we absolutely need to do. We've seen 2 national outages for our 911 system just within the last, I think, 10 months. We've seen that happen, and it's something that nobody ever thinks about until they absolutely need it. And if you have a broken system and somebody goes, oh my God, Grandpa's not breathing, what can we do? You call 911, we have a service outage, and I want to fix things before they're too broken to be fixed. I was living out in Lake Mills during COVID, and I was volunteering in the free time that I had for the Lake Mills EMS. They were privately funded, so we could only raise money by doing pancake breakfasts, chili suppers, and different things like that. During COVID, obviously couldn't do it. So we ended up running out of money in 2022, and they had to disband Lake Mills EMS. And so that's a rural community. Closest hospital is 35 minutes from there, no matter which direction you go. And I don't want to see that happen in any other community, because rural communities are, starving for healthcare as it is. And if we don't even have the basic emergency medicine for people living in these farming communities, then we're not doing a good job as legislators to help people in these communities. So that is my biggest issue. I don't think anybody can really, sit there and say, oh, well, I don't think we need 911, because we do, just like we need roads and bridges and infrastructure. And, going back to the, we have such a split. People ask me all the time, how are you going to, work across the aisle? How are you going to talk to people in the other party? And I always tell them my specialty is venous access for little kids. I do a lot of ultrasound and stuff for very difficult, little tiny veins. And I always tell them, if I can talk a 3-year-old into getting an IV, I think I can talk to people about policy issues across the aisle that are going to benefit their own constituents.
Well, thank you, Ben Steinhoff of Pewaukee, the Democratic candidate for the 5th Congressional District. The election is November 5th. Ben Steinhoff, thank you for talking with WisconsinEye.
Thank you guys for having me.
This programming is brought to you by our generous sponsors. Thank you for watching.